Okay, started the recording. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Rutgers Business School Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Mike Park. I'm the coordinator of student experience and engagement for the business school. And it's our pleasure to be hosting Lisa Kent and Rhonda Johnson here. For logistically, just a couple of logistics before we get started, housekeeping items. For anyone attending for real points, those will be provided at the end of the session. There will be Q&A at the end of the session as well. If you have questions in the meantime, please put them in the chat and we'll get to those during the question and answer period. And again, one other thing, we would like to thank Professor Beth Fiesler for hosting us in her business forum class. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here due to COVID protocols, but we would like to thank her class for joining us as well. I'm now going to turn it over to Lisa Kent, who will be our MC as well as one of our featured speakers.
Right. Speaking of pivoting, we also lost the professor who was going to host our discussion today. So hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Kent. I am here with Rhonda Johnson to talk with you about our career paths, to ask each other lots of questions and to answer yours. And we thought we'd get started with a quick poll just to know with whom we're speaking today. So I'm not sure if everybody in the classroom can answer this question. So we'll count a whole bunch of you as current students. But everybody else who is on the line, please take a moment and answer these two polling questions for us. And Rhonda, just so you know, there's a class, I think, of mostly juniors and seniors in the business school that are watching this session today. So as well as what we're seeing in the poll, we have several students. We did open this Zoom up, so we kind of wanted to have a sense of who was our target audience and what did you want to talk about today? One of the fun things for me, and I try to always look at the bright side, even of COVID, and some of you may have been my students at Rutgers, where we went all remote, is how are you thinking about the future? Would you like to be back in an office or in an office for the first time? Would you like to work remotely, and does that open up more opportunities for you? Or do you like the idea of working in a hybrid environment? Rhonda and I will talk about our past experiences working in offices and remotely. And today, Luminations is hybrid. We'd be very interested to get your opinions about it as we think about going forward, setting the strategy for our company. All right, I think we have a good sense. We have a lot of students, mostly undergrads, a few graduates, and some folks out in the working world. We have some other, and those of you who said other, I'm curious, you can always let me know who you are later on in the chat, and if there's anything special we can answer for you. So look at in the future, I'm gonna stop sharing. If I stop sharing, will you be able to show the poll results, Matt?
I see them, Lise.
You can see them? Okay. Yep. So what I'm looking at is the work in office question. Are you? So very interesting that it's almost a tie for work in the office and work in a hybrid environment, and some not sure. And this is a conversation we have often about how is it best to work? At what point in your life and your career do you need different kinds of support in office or working remotely? And what does it mean for the future of the way we collaborate and work together, as well as the way we train and develop folks? And then related to the future of current work or your current work today, a lot of energy for marketing and digital marketing, sales, some finance and accounting, operations, nobody in R&D and engineering, and then some others. Okay, so this is helpful for us as we get started. And I'm gonna stop sharing now. So as I said, welcome everybody. We're happy to be here with you today. This is my second opportunity to be with the Distinguished Speaking Series. And the last time I did it, we were all together in a room, a big room, and that was really nice. And I hope to have a chance to do that again, maybe this year. Also, the last time we did it, I taught at Rutgers, but I did not have a son who was a Rutgers student. And today I actually have on campus a freshman. at Rutgers. So I have lots of different perspectives in the way in which I interact with Rutgers University. We're going to get started instead of letting Matt introduce us by taking you all through our career ladders and our career journeys. We can be interrupted if you want to interrupt with a question or two. And if not, Rhonda and I will both go through our piece. And then I have some questions that I'm going to ask her and myself, and we welcome your questions. It is intended to be informal though, so if you want to interrupt, you can throw something into the chat. You can raise your hand the old-fashioned way. We can see a lot of you, or you can raise your hand the technical way, whatever works for you. I love when you keep your cameras on. I know that that is not a requirement at Rutgers. If you want to put them on just to talk to us, that's fine too. Okay, so we'll get started. And Matt, if you could put back up our presentation. So this is me. As I mentioned, I have the privilege of teaching both in the undergraduate program at RBS, but also in the grad program. And in the grad program, I typically focus on e-commerce, and in the undergrad program on integrated and digital marketing. So as I said, I know some of you are past or current students, and welcome. We also have the Business Forum students joining us today, and welcome to you. I have taught and do teach at other places too, NYU being one, Lehigh University being another. It's a funny thing, I tend to focus more on entrepreneurship at Lehigh and more on digital marketing at Rutgers, just kind of a coincidence of what classes I get asked to teach. And then you'll see a little badge. Although I had to stop during COVID, I'm a certified New Jersey EMT, and I love being a volunteer as much as I love making money. So I do both, and I'll talk about that. I mentioned my son, Matt, who is now a freshman there. I also have two other kids, and you could probably guess by the logos here, those two went to Lehigh University. As I started teaching, I also started writing books. I wrote books because I felt like I had something to share, and I always wanted to write a book. And I actually saw my book editor out here in the audience today. But I also wrote books because I didn't want to make my students spend $500 buying books for a class. And so I was able to, if I offered training from these books in the class, knock the price down to $4.99, and everybody could get the book for cheap. So some of them are in the bookstore, some of them are on Amazon. And if you want to buy them at a discounted price, all you got to do is let me know. Okay, let's go to the next page. So this is my career ladder, and I call it a ladder, and the design is very much a stair-step ladder, but it's really not a direct ladder. And I'll talk a little bit about how in various places I did several roles. And I know when Rhonda speaks, she also will talk about that. And sometimes our jobs to move up is to get well-rounded. And so we do several different responsibilities within one company or within many. So I started out in undergrad thinking I wanted to do something in international relations or maybe international business. And I was the very useful French literature major. Nobody was sure, especially my parents, if I was going to get a job with that major. But I really loved studying it. And I ended up studying both French and Spanish and thinking worst case scenario, I could teach English in a foreign country because I can speak those languages. I was most heavily recruited by the CIA and the National and the NSA. But I chose that was not the path I wanted to go into. I ended up joining an international global consulting firm called Greenwich Associates. So right out of school, I and a class of about 20 recent undergrads were senior or junior research associates. What did that mean? That meant that we checked data, lots of data on financial services companies like banks and investment banks to help report for them on how they were doing with their customers. So for instance, one of my clients was a large corporate pension fund. They wanted to know what their company, their corporate clients thought about them. So vast quantitative surveys were done. And back then, and this was in the the late 80s. When did I graduate? Yeah, late 80s, early 90s. We aggregated them through the computer, but the computer was a big room, a whole floor in the building, specially climate controlled with a special floor. And then somebody had to check all the numbers. And that was me and the other research associates. And while I learned a lot about finance and banking during my 2 years at Greenwich Associates, I also learned that I didn't want to be in financial services. And so I had hoped to do something in marketing. And I was lucky enough to get into Northwestern to study marketing. And there, one of the most important things that I learned, in addition to having great professors and learning about consumer behavior and negotiation and advertising, was how to work in a team. Northwestern, or the Kellogg School, was one of the first places to force you to work in a team in almost every class. Now, today, that's the norm. And it's a good thing that it's the norm, because that's how we really work in corporate America and around the globe. But back then, it was unusual. And learning how to work in a team where you don't necessarily have authority or power, but you do have a deliverable, that has helped me in my career all the way up to this day. Coming out of Northwestern, and actually as an intern, I was able to go to Procter and Gamble. I'm assuming that everybody has heard of Procter and Gamble and brands like Tide and Pantene and Olay. And I worked as a summer intern at a division of Procter and Gamble in Connecticut called Richardson Vicks. And at the time, Richardson Vicks had brands like Chloraseptic and Formula 44 and NyQuil. And they also had the skincare brand. Back then, it was called Oil of Olay, not Olay. And they also had a number of sun care brands as well. So I did that for summer. I both was incredibly stressed and also very happy to be there in order to get into Procter and Gamble then. And I think even today, they really wanted you to take a test, a quantitative test called the PMAT, and B, be willing to rotate into sales. And this is where Rhonda's and my journeys really start to dovetail. In Procter and Gamble, in order to move up past your first assignment in marketing, at that time you needed to rotate out into sales and rotate out into the sales force in whatever territory they gave you with whatever type of retailer they gave you. And again, this was a while ago, so a lot less e-commerce and a lot more brick and mortar retail. And some of my accounts were tiny little chains like Target, which was a Minneapolis-based mass merchandiser that had three stores. And then I also called on a food chain out there called Jewel, Osco, and some chain drug through a drug wholesaler.
So Lisa, did you relocate?
I did. I actually moved to Chicago for what I thought was going to be 4 to 6 months, which ended up being a year, because once you're in, you're actually covering a territory, and it's not just you're following a salesperson around. And it does take a little time to learn how to really talk to the buyers or merchandisers. And then I liked it. On top of that, the company I was working for, Richardson Vicks, was moving from Connecticut to Cincinnati. And my then husband had just relocated to Connecticut to be with me at Richardson Vicks. So it was likely that I was not going to be able to stay long-term with P&G in Cincinnati. So I deliberately extended my time in the sales function to become what was very clear to me, a better general manager. And then when I rotated back to Connecticut and they were moving to Cincinnati, I went on to another company that most of you have probably heard of, and that's Nestle. And at that time I worked on Nestle Toll House Morsels. And this was the chocolate and confection division of Nestle, which was in Purchase, New York. So things like Nestle Crunch, which is no longer Nestle Crunch, it's actually owned by Ferraro Chocolate today, and Butterfinger, same. and also all the Toll House morsels, butterscotch and mini and chocolate and semi-sweet chocolate. And I got to launch white chocolate treasures and white chocolate morsels for the very first time. White chocolate was not well known in the US when I did it. I also spent time in sales with Nestle because Nestle was a very sales focused company. There were really only two things that drove success for a brand like Toll House morsels. One was betting on the right price of chocolate and cocoa, because if you bought it at too high of a price and you couldn't sell the morsels for a higher price, that was a problem. And the other was understanding how in the baking season, which started in October and ended in February, you were going to sell as much as you possibly could in the morsel category. That's when people baked historically anywhere in the US, but heavily focused on cities like Seattle, Minneapolis, Denver, New York. I learned there were baking markets in the US, and to this day, there are markets that make up the majority of the volume of Nestle Toll House morsels. But again, being back in the field, predominantly for probably about 3 months, spending my time predominantly in the field, out with the retailers, helped me make sure that we sold the majority of the volume we needed to sell during the baking season. Today, by the way, baking, and especially with COVID, is a little bit more year round, but it was not at the time. Then I left and I went to Johnson and Johnson. Why did I leave? Because this company too relocated and they moved out to the West Coast. And I decided I'm only going to go work for a company that has great brands, whose headquarters is driving distance from wherever I'm going to work. And so I ended up at Johnson and Johnson in Stillman, New Jersey. And there, the headquarters, God forbid they did relocate to the headquarters, was in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I wouldn't have to move. At the time, brands there, again, brands you've heard of, Johnson's Baby, Band-Aid, lots of other brands they owned at the time, Reach. For a time, they owned Purell. They owned lots of skincare businesses. They had bought, when I joined them, Clean and Clear, which was a tiny little brand that then became the #1 acne brand in the US until they bought Neutrogena. And then when they bought Neutrogena, that became the #1 brand. And I was there for almost 12 years. And I left as the executive director of innovation in global baby and kids. And I left at a crazy time to get into the .com world. It was right before the big bust, which most of you may not even know about. But I ran the first nationwide online grocer, and it was called netgrocer.com. And once again, I am in the world of retail. Only now, instead of being facing to retailers, I am the retailer. Netgrocer.com is a retailer, a food retailer primarily. And something to know about food retailers is they don't make a lot of money. They have a little margin to play with. And I was net grocer for a while until we sold the company to Wakefern, which is the group that owns ShopRite. And I know that a lot of Rutgers students end up rotating into Wakefern and doing internships there, and perhaps some of you are doing that. Lastly, I founded a consulting firm called Luminations, where we focused on innovation and new product development and marketing. 20 years ago, when I started the company, I partly started it to help women who wanted to work part-time flexibly because corporate America couldn't do that. And I thought I'd maybe be running the company for a few years. And here we are almost 21 years later, and there's still lots of opportunity for women who want to work flexibly to work in corporations through us, through Luminations. But also with COVID, a whole new way of thinking about flexible work. That's partly why I asked that polling question, and a great opportunity for us because our clients are losing lots of wonderful talent through the Great Resignation, and we place those people in great roles. The last piece of my story I'll talk about in the next page. If you want to go to the next page, Matt. And I call this a story of friendship and networking. And we'll talk about the importance of networks, informal and formal. Last year, my company was acquired by Rhonda's company. It's called MPG. And over the 12 years we worked at J&J and the 20 plus years that I was at Net Grocer and running Luminations, we kept in touch. And I kept in touch with lots of former colleagues from Johnson & Johnson who had gone to Market Performance Group, MPG. And first we just kept in touch because I missed them. And then we kept in touch because we did projects together. We did a lot of marketing. They did a lot of great sales work. There were lots of opportunities for me to pull them in or vice versa over that probably 15-year period when we started overlapping in work. And that network led me to be able to sell Luminations to MPG last year. Now, it's not the only reason. I like to think I built a great company and that it adds a lot of value to anybody who would purchase us. But it was a very comfortable reason because they knew me and they knew what we could do. And I knew them and I knew the potential of what they could do. I was impressed. Hopefully they were too. And by staying in touch, literally as friends, but also as work colleagues, I was able to execute that transaction. Not only that, because they are friends and I trust and respect them, I'm still there working and running Luminations, but now helping to build the broader MPG. And this next question I'm going to skip, which is where do I start if I'm looking for a job? And we'll get to that later. And I'm going to take a breath and turn the screen over to Rhonda to talk through her career path in sales.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, yeah, Lisa, you were so eloquent in terms of, you know, how you talk through your career path. The one thing I want the group to know is like, and I just want to call out Net Grocer. Lisa is 10 years ahead of her time in terms of what she sees, right? And that's a big part of why she's in marketing and innovation, and that she's pretty much about 10 years ahead of what she sees from a business perspective. And, you know, Lisa, I don't know if anybody on the phone or in the group is with us right now that was part of Net Grocer, but you were literally like 10 years ahead of your time, if not more, right? And we were like, Lisa, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're crazy. Like, this is a business model that's never going to work, right? And guess what? You were just 10 years ahead of your time, which is so funny. But you've had a very illustrious career. So yeah, to be up against you, I feel very honored. So thank you.
Well, ditto that.
Yeah. So couple things. Number one, I'm sorry for the way I look, but the reality is this meeting was not on my calendar. I knew I had to do it. I just didn't know I had to do it today. So I apologize for that, but I'm really happy to be here. And, you know, thank you for Lisa for including me in this. So really quick in terms of who I am, and thank you, Delilah and team, for putting these bullets together. But, you know, I'm an EVP at Market Performance Group at this point. I oversee business development, but I would tell you and Lisa would attest to, I'm pretty much engaged in everything. Everything from, you know, business development way upstream, prospecting, all the way through to running the business in a number of ways. I did have a double major in marketing and finance, and I'll talk you through that journey a little bit because ironically, J&J relocated me and I didn't have my undergrad yet, so I had to restart at a different university. Several leadership positions at J&J. We'll talk a little bit about that cross-functional, you know, the what I would say just the openness, I would say the openness to reach out and do different things. Sometimes it takes you laterally versus up, but that's a pretty big part of my career ladder. And then you can see, obviously, I've got, a number of what I would say industry and or, philanthropic things under my belt. So I'm also a mom of two. Neither one of my children went to Rutgers, but they love Rutgers. They were both URIs. They went to University of Rhode Island undergrad, and then they both did their graduate work. Alec was at Rider. My daughter did her graduate work online, and they're both in the education field. So I think that's actually, for those that are on the phone, a really interesting kind of dynamic in the context of, I grew up in business. I grew up in finance, marketing, sales, corporate America, working for the top 50s. Guess what? My kids are in education. So, right? They're like, Mom, we wouldn't want to do what you do any day of the year. And they're both in education. Both have their masters. Cassidy's a kindergarten teacher. Alec is a guidance counselor. And Alec is a huge, huge, huge basketball fan and a basketball coach. So proud of them beyond what I ever did in my career. Go to the next slide. So this is funny. So I would actually say Lisa and I probably did not connect until J&J. And I have a funny story for you guys with Lisa at J&J. But long story short, and this would never happen today, guys, but I was a undergrad finance major at Rider. I was doing an internship at J&J. Not even an internship, back up. It was a summer job. I was working in the finance department. They came to me in August. So this was probably 1983, 1984. They came to me in August, right before my parents were paying for my next round of, university payments. And they said, hey, we want to hire you full-time and we'll pay for the rest of your education. So I was a junior. I was going into my junior year, undergrad, working as an internship in the summer. And they hired me full-time. And not only did they pay for my education, but they also gave me the time that I needed to kind of go get my degree, my undergrad degree. Funny story, though, in that through those, call it 3 years or so of finishing up, because now I'm working full-time, I'm going part-time to school, I was very fortunate to have lived through probably 3 functions. I want to say accounts payable, accounts receivable, general financial reporting, et cetera. But I was also able to live through 3 different business models. One was medical device, one was consumer, one was pharma. And so I got my foundational training in those 3 different fields as a finance person per se. And when after 5 years of doing that work, I decided I didn't want to be an accountant for the rest of my life. I just did not want to be. It was not me. It was great foundational training, but I was like, I have to do something different. And so I had flipped from accounting and finance to sales. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because everybody at J&J kept saying, well, your title is accountant, and now you're going to go be a sales rep. And I was like, yeah, well, I just feel like that's where I want to be. Lo and behold, they reload me up to Albany, New York. So back to Lisa's conversation about relo, they said, okay, well, if you want to be in sales, we're going to relocate you up to Albany, New York. Went. That's where I jumped into SUNY and finished up my undergrad. The beautiful thing was SUNY took all of my finance creds, everything. And they said, but you can't graduate from SUNY with a finance degree unless you retake the finance courses at SUNY. And so what they did for me is they allowed me to double major, and they allowed me to double major in marketing. So all I had to do was take my marketing classes there. And so working full time, going to SUNY, double major finance and marketing. That's where I kind of stepped out of my undergrad. what I would tell you guys is, similar to Lisa, they told me that I would be up there maybe 2 years, maybe 2 years. I was up there for 9. And the funny part is, if George Cleary is on the phone, although I don't think he is, but George Cleary, who's one of our managing partners, I ended up following him. So he got promoted, then I took his next job. He got promoted, I took his next job. Long story short, I ended up staying in Albany and worked my way through a number of territories, but never had to reload, which was a beautiful thing. But I got this great experience. They moved me back to New Jersey. And Lisa, you cut me off if I'm being too long-winded, but they moved me back to New Jersey, and I took a great position for about 1.5 years working for George. And they came to me with the global franchise position, and it was global franchise skincare, marketing role, very strategic, very global. I think we were working with 36 countries at the time. And I didn't have marketing experience. Like I really didn't. I never had, like pure marketing. And I decided I had to take the role, meaning it was kind of a lateral. It was a pretty big job, but it was kind of a lateral at the time. And I took that role and I learned so much. I learned so much about marketing, brand marketing, strat plan, P&L from a different perspective, P&L from a branding perspective versus a finance perspective, which was different. And I did that role for a couple of years. And then I stepped back into the US. And from there, I just catapulted in terms of having this cross-functional experience, having done all the things I did was really the key. So here's what I would tell you guys, like you're sitting there in your undergrad chairs. I had so many friends at J&J that were like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, why are you taking all these lateral roles and getting all this cross-functional experience? And I watched so many of my peers move up ahead of me. They moved up into more senior positions. They were making more money, whatever, right? And the long story short of it is I took a little bit of a detour to get broader experiences because my passion was there, not because I felt like it was going to pay off short term. I did it because my passion was there. I was curious. I wanted to learn. I wanted to broaden my experience. And guess what? It took me 3 years to catch up and boom, step right over them in terms of my level, my seniority, my position in the organization. And so the only thing that I would leave you guys with is follow your passion, follow your interests, and it's going to take you to exactly where you want to go. You may not get there as quickly as others, but I'll bet you get there with a lot more pride and happiness and confidence in terms of where you're going from a career perspective. It really isn't. What's the word I'm looking for, Lisa? It is the journey. It's the journey. It's not
a straight line. It's not a ladder.
Yeah.
And if you were to ask both of us, I mean, there's definitely a theme here. I had somebody ask me once, Rhonda, well, how did you plan your career strategy? Well, it looks really well planned now when you put it all on a page, but we just did what we thought would teach us a lot so we were able to satisfy that intellectual curiosity and get better at what we wanted to do. And the good news is that took me to a leadership role in marketing, and her, I hope you're going to get to your chief customer officer role, to a leadership role in sales. But I don't know if we ever deliberately said, well, I'm going to take these couple of detours and then eventually I'll be president of a company. It was nice when I was, but that wasn't my thinking at the time.
Well, and the other thing I would tell you too, like to Lisa's point around chief customer officer, I was very fortunate. That for me, my career was my hobby in that I loved what I did. And the day that I didn't love what I do is the day that I was stepping out. And so while I will always be in debt to J&J for everything that they did for my career, I was at that point, and you guys are going to think this is so old, but I was in my early to mid 40s, and I was kind of bored. And respectfully, like, God bless J&J, right? But I was just kind of bored. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't just like live here for the next, call it 10, 15 years or whatever it might be. And I had this opportunity to go to Merck. So think about this, guys. I was 19 when I started at J&J. I was in my mid 40s when I stepped away. It was like it's like separating yourself from your parents, right? But I was like, I just have to go out and do this. I just have to go out and do it. And it wasn't that Merck came to me or I went to them. It just happened based on, to Lisa's point, and the whole conversation around networking. It just happened naturally that I was having conversations with people that I worked with for years, as well as a number of people I didn't work with for years. And I started talking to Merck, and I ended up getting like the job of it was the best job I ever had. I had the most amazing team. I had the best portfolio of brands. I had a really nimble business unit that I was working with. It was like one of the funnest things I did for 5 years. Unfortunately and fortunately, we sold the business for $14 billion, 14 and change, to Bayer. I would have loved to have stayed there another 5 years, but it didn't work out that way. So we sold the business to Bayer. And at that point, I had to reassess my career again, right? I was still young in my career, call it. And I had to reassess. And I was a friend of MPG. I was a client of MPG. And thus, long story short, I ended up joining MPG. And I've been blessed with how much I've learned over the last 7 years being with them. Small, medium, large, all kinds of different amazing clients we're working with, but we're having a lot of fun. So I guess my point is, like, there is no simple career path. I think generationally, you guys are in a really interesting place because I think you're going to focus more on your passion in your careers than you are the loyalty to specific companies. But I think that's awesome. So, yep.
So can I just ask you to tell everybody who's watching, what were the brands in that Merck portfolio? Because they may not know. And Rhonda, over her years, she says she was lucky. She makes luck. And she was running some killer brands before she left to go to Merck and when she was at Merck. And although I want everybody to follow their passion, and I do, I'm going to tell you, getting grounding and fundamental training at a great organization, that counts a lot too. But can you talk a little bit about that, Rhonda?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I don't have to go back to the J&J brands. I mean, the one thing I didn't tell you guys is I thought about stepping out of J&J, call it at that midpoint, probably midway up the ladder. I didn't have food experience. So I started looking at Unilever and Nestle and a number of other companies and Kellogg's to get my food experience. And I was really lucky to be introduced to an opportunity with brands called Splenda. So if anybody knows the Splenda brand, very food, right? I mean, this is like palletized truckloads to Kroger, 7 trucks going to Kroger, like, which is very different than Tylenol, right? But I also got a lot of exposure to licensing because I was running the Lactate brand. So Lactate on the OTC side was about call it a $20 million brand. On the milk side, the dairy side, it was a $900 million. It was $1 billion brand, essentially. And so I had the fortunate experience to actually run that brand from a licensing standpoint with HB Hood. And it really gave me a lot of exposure to food as an industry, CPG, right? That said, when I went over to Merck, I had the most amazing brands, honestly. And the brands were all, so Claritin is pretty seasonal, right? Allergy. Any of you guys, like guys that have allergies, like, it's a pretty seasonal brand to a certain extent. So we were running the #1 brand in the allergy category called Claritin. The other brand that I was very particularly proud of was Coppertone. Again, very seasonal, business models, very different than a number of other brands because of consignment and returns and things like that. But I had I was lucky enough to run Coppertone. We had Dr. Scholl's, we had Miralax, and then we had a number of tail brands that I would say tail brands in the context of, smaller in terms of our total portfolio, but pretty significant within the categories in which they compete. So just an amazing, amazing assortment of brands.
So, it occurs to me, and I'm going to flip now to the questions, Matt, so we can go to that. And then we can show everybody's faces, whoever wants to turn on their camera, if they want, that we could actually talk for an hour on any one job that you did or that I did, because within each job was a lot of adventure, a lot of learning, and not gonna lie, plenty of pain and hassle too. But if anybody wants to ask about a specific job, you can. I see we have a very interesting mix of students and people from our network of the past. And I might call one of them up to talk.
I see the students.
Yeah. So I have a list of questions that were submitted in advance, which I can ask. But before I do, I'm going to ask the business forum class. If you have anything you want to ask us, you can throw it into the chat. If you're logged on, you could have somebody unmute and tell us. And for anybody else, if you want to throw a question into the chat, please do. And if not, I'm going to we actually don't have that much time, but I'll cover a couple of the questions that were asked in advance.
Elise, the other thing, it just thought-provoking for the team, but we didn't even talk about virtual versus.
Nope.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation for this audience in terms of where do we think the world is going to go?
Yeah.
It's debatable. Yeah. So.
Questions for us first. Okay, I think the class unmuted. Does that mean you have something you want to share? Okay. I can't hear you if you are trying to ask me a question. Business forum. Okay. Anybody else want to ask a question? Please either put it into the chat or unmute and ask.
Hi, Rhonda and Lisa. It's Craig Stoll.
Hi.
Hi. As I listened to both of your stellar careers and as you went through that timeline, it seems to me, at least if we're talking with students here, you never said no to an opportunity that you were passionate about, whether it had you move or got into a place that was uncomfortable. What would be your advice to somebody starting off today about that? Because so often, I mean, I have 4 children myself, so we often hear that, oh, I want to do this specifically or that specifically. What would be something you would say to that angle of making sure that you capture all the opportunities available to you?
You want to tackle that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, Craig. I don't know necessarily that I overtly said no. I did. I didn't want to move to Bentonville. So separately, I don't know that I didn't overtly, or I overtly said no to an opportunity. I felt like from a career perspective, I kind of knew my angles and my gaps. and where I wanted to go. And so I felt like I drove it to a certain extent. What I would tell you is I left jobs where I wanted to. Like there were a few positions I had that I loved. But I knew that if I didn't say yes to a certain position at the time that it was available to me, that it was not going to be open for a number of months and or years and or ever again. And so I had to make those decisions. But I would tell you, I don't feel like I had to say no, with the exception of one time, which was to relocate to Bentonville. No offense, Walmart team, but
Yeah. I mean, I would build on that and just say it's back to the point that Rhonda made earlier about openness. It's not so much saying yes or no, it's listening. And she mentioned two of her children, her two kids went into education. Two of mine have not gone into business, one into medicine, one into education. But I think that being open to finding jobs that maybe you wouldn't have considered, and at least listening and thinking about what can you get from them is important. And I had sometimes in all my classes, I bring guest speakers. And I brought one guest speaker, some of you guys know him, Mike Marquis, who worked for me at J&J, started out in finance, and he wanted to come to marketing. And nobody would take him. He's very, very smart, because it's a risk, right? You get one head count in marketing, maybe, and if you take somebody from finance, they might not be the right person. Oh no. Well, I was smart enough to take him, and he was a great marketer, as well as having that financial background. He wanted something new, and I wanted to try something new. And when Mike gets asked that question, Craig, he always says, get into the company that you admire. Who cares what the function is? If you want to work at Johnson & Johnson and they only have a sales job, but you think you want to do marketing or finance, get in the door. And if you want to work at Google, but they only have an analytics role and you think, maybe I don't want to do analytics long-term, get into the company. And that's what I would tell, that's what I tell my students, and what I would tell the folks on this lecture is identify the place where you want to be, at least for a while. And if they don't have exactly the right job, just get in the door. And if you're good, you'll find a way to migrate over to what you want.
that's not,
And
yep.
I unmuted Margarita Rossi, who I saw was on the call, because another great way to get experience, if you don't find exactly what you want in the job, is to volunteer. And you see that Rhonda did some volunteering and I did some volunteering. Well, what Margarita does is awesome. And I don't know if you would spend just a minute, Margarita, and talk about the group that you're mentoring now and what they're doing. I don't know if they need help and Rutgers wants to help, but I think just sharing that, and none of the girls you're mentoring had business experience because they're too young, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa and Rhonda. So I had the privilege of working with Lisa and Rhonda at Johnson & Johnson. So it just shows you the network. I left after a 30-year career a year ago. And my passion, along with my job, which was in sales and marketing, was always around developing and advancing women. It's been for 20 plus years, I spent any extra time in the corporation working on trying to help any woman I could. And now that I've left and I'm on to my next season, I've taken that energy, doing it one at a university level, but two, what Lisa's talking about is actually at the high school level. So my daughter goes to an independent school here in New Jersey. And in 2019, they visited a refugee camp in South Africa. They originally thought that they were going to supply the girls with refurbished iPads to keep them in school. But what they recognized was the extent of period poverty that existed. And so they went out and they created a reusable product at 1.0. They shared it with the girls in Malawi. And there were some things that weren't great about it. And they, by using the engineering cycle, they redeveloped it. And today, I'm proud to say that we've got 30 girls in the program, 8 that have gone on to university, and they have 16 sewer sellers. So they took not only creating a product and getting applying for a patent and these types of things, but now they actually created a curriculum and partnered with people on the ground there so that they could teach them to sew them and to go out into the village and sell them. So not only are they keeping the girls in school an extra year and a half, which will increase their income level by 14%, but more importantly, they're giving them an opportunity to create an income, which today in Malawi, they live on less than $1 a day. By selling this product in the market, they can make $300. So as you can see, they can basically provide for their entire family. And so these are high school girls, and they are now going out and pitching companies to receive funding. And so I've been mentoring them. I was there this morning, and tomorrow they're pitching one of the chairmen at J&J and also the former CEO of Kind Bars. And you know, they're as young as my daughter, who's 15, and as old as 18.
Old as 18. So I wanted you to hear that story from Margarita because, again, if you can't find exactly the right job, there's always a way to expand your horizons. Think about what those girls have learned and think about the exposure that they've gotten. So we actually don't have much time left, but I will tell you that if you want to reach out on LinkedIn, I will link in with you, except if you're my student, then you have to wait till I'm done grading you this semester. I don't know, Rhonda, if it's okay with you, we can provide your LinkedIn too.
Oh, yeah,
and then we become part of your network. And we have, hopefully you can see even from today, a great network that we're happy to share. There's a question in the chat. And that question was about, it's probably more for Rhonda than for me. How has working with mass retailers changed over the years? And who has traditionally been the most difficult? And I'm just going to add to that. And where do we see great opportunity?
Interestingly, how has it changed? I don't know that it has changed much. I mean, I think what I would tell you is like the technical skill of working with a Walmart and or a Target, given their focus on .com and click, collect and ship and like all of that stuff, right? I mean, we've had to get smarter in terms of distribution networks within the retailer. I would tell you it has not significantly changed. The framework of the channels, right? Amazon, Pure Play, Walmart, Target, and then you've got your drug piece. And then importantly, like don't discount grocery, right? Like groceries up and coming because of their capability in terms of click and ship and direct delivery and things like that. You know, the sophistication of working with the retailers has changed, but I would not say that the dynamic of how we work with them has changed all that significantly. That's my opinion. So
it's the same core skills, only now maybe lots more data and more technology. And now there's this whole new behemoth, which is either click and connect or e-commerce that 20 years ago, we were just not looking at.
yeah, I mean, I would say it's not more data, it's just the right data. And
Okay.
yeah, and then the other thing I would say is just the channels of distribution within mass, right? So the way you manage Walmart is not just about in store anymore. You have to really get smarts on supply chain, on .com, et cetera. So the ability to manage them has just ramped up in terms of your technical sophistication requirements in terms of working with them, if that makes sense.
So I'm not going to get to my whole list of questions, but it's interesting. We have comments about International Women's Day, and I could think of nothing better than getting to talk to people who might be thinking about entering or changing what they're doing in the workforce, women and men, and any gender you choose. But I do want to say that it was different 20 years ago than it is today. And it's nice to be able to talk to you as leaders and as women. So thank you all so much for joining us. As I said, we're here. And thank you, Matt, for inviting us to speak. And maybe we'll get to see you all in person next time around. Oh, and Matt, can you tell them how to get their points?
Yes. So sorry, give me 1 second. Just gonna swap sharing here. So thank you again, Lisa and Rhonda, for presenting to us today, for joining us here in the RBS Distinguished Speaker Series.
Thank you.
Thank you. And they get their code how?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Okay.
So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And we'd like to also give thanks to all of our spring speakers this series, and hope you will join us again next in a couple weeks for Natasha, who will be joining us for the Newark campus, or Uze, who will be joining us on the New Brunswick campus at the end of the month. So again, we hope that you will join us for all of our future spheres. Thank you to all of our speakers, to Lisa and Rhonda for presenting today, as well as again to Professor Fiesler's class for hosting. So I'm going to go ahead and share our QR codes now. So anyone here for real points, you can scan the codes. And thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.